Bob Calishman here from Millennium, and I just thought today we would have a varied program in the sense of today being the 5th of June, and tomorrow we'll be honoring the brave men and women of the United States Armed Forces, namely the United States Navy and the United States Army. And I'd like to more or less bring you back to June 6, 1944, when the greatest invasion force ever assembled stood off the coast of Normandy, France. And a lot of brave men went ashore, and it was their last day. And it went wave after wave after wave. A wave is landing boats and landing craft, and it was tanks and men and tanks, and it was like going into a meat grinder, and they just went in, and as they hit the beach, they fell, and as they fell, the next wave came in, and it was just a relentless push of the 1st Army Division and the 1st Army, their relentless attack on this fortress of Normandy. And they attacked after attack after attack, and they finally achieved a foothold. And these brave men and women stood and kept their ground. And tomorrow, June 6th, is their day. And it should be a day where we honor their memory and not the memory of the so-called senators who seem to be glory seekers. Very few of them, in my mind, ever went ashore at Normandy. And once again, I'd like to give the United States Army and the United States Navy for their relentless pursuit and landing a foothold on the shores of Europe and destroying the Nazi boot. And I'd like to thank them and thank them in memory and assure them that we veterans, lest we forget. And along the same lines is the fact that what I'd like to mention to you is that your host, Robert Calishman, had the honor of receiving the Veterans Award from the Daughters of the American Revolution, the local chapter, the Abigail Phelps chapter, and they gave us an award for our service to veterans and to the town of Simsbury. And this is an award that I don't take lightly, and people should not take lightly. This is an organization that's been with the United States of America since the inception and have served American veterans and Americans throughout the ages, all up to the present day, 2019, June 5th. And they're still serving. And having said that, I just would like to briefly mention the Memorial Day Parade, which was held, I think, on 27 May, which concluded with an address of the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs, Major Sardi, who came to Simsbury to address the citizens of Simsbury, which in my mind was an honor to have a dignitary come and pay honor to the veterans who, once again, the fallen veterans of Simsbury. And each veteran was paid tribute by the Boy Scouts of the local chapter, 75, and they mentioned the soldiers, airmen, Marines, that had fallen during the war. And the last of the falling is Sergeant Delgado, and he was the last one, and he fell in Iraq. And then we go back, and we went right down the line, including Civil War and Revolutionary War. And we're finally in Simsbury, as veterans, we're finally recognizing and upkeeping the Civil War monument, which should be kept up. And here again, this is a monument to the veterans that fought in the Civil War. And in my mind, any historian would tell you that the Civil War was the bloodiest war the United States of America ever fought. We lost more men in the Civil War than we lost in all wars combined that America took part in. And these were brave men, and it stood very bravely, where you could stand shoulder to shoulder, almost nose to nose, and fire and take a shot. And in those days, they fired what we call a mini ball. And when it hit, it splattered. And when it splattered, it took everything out in its path. And that's why you've seen so many maimed soldiers coming back. And this is one of the honors that Major or Lieutenant Colonel Eno, when he came back from the Civil War, and he donated that land, which they use now as land of love, whatever. That land, in my mind, was donated to the veterans of the Civil War, who came back, and due to the carnage and loss of limb and loss of morale, they couldn't hold a job. They couldn't go in the fields. They couldn't plow. They couldn't milk a cow. So they provided a place for them to stay till the end of their days. And this was Major Eno who donated this land. And in my mind, in my opinion, that land there, that was donated to Civil War veterans and the veterans that came after them. And how it became what it is today, I don't know, through whatever they did there. But I think if you look into the record of Major Eno being a Civil War officer, and in those days the Civil War men took care of their own regiment. A good example is Fetch. He was a colonel. His name was Fetch. When he came back, he provided a home for his regiment, which he sponsored. In those days, when you came from wealth, you paid for your own regiment. You paid to train them, feed them, put them in the field, and take them to battle. But Colonel Fitch took it a step further, so when they came back, he bought a home, and he put these Civil War veterans into his home, and he looked after them. And it later revolved into what was known in Connecticut as the Fitch Fund. It was a veterans fund where a veteran that was short, or a veteran had misgivings, or life was unkind to him in many cases, he was disabled and couldn't walk, he could go to that fund and they would pay him. And it was established, and then it carried into the Rocky Hill Veterans Home and Hospital, and they moved it up from Fairfield County. They moved it into what is now known as Rocky Hill. And I like to remind people that this facility was more or less put together in the late 30s by veterans of the World War I. Their nickels and dimes and pennies and effort and sweat, they built that place. And we used to, much to my chagrin, we don't do it anymore. We used to take care of 5,000 veterans. We had a hospital where you could go and get an operation, and if you were a veteran or war veteran, you could go there and it wouldn't cost you a dime. The veterans would pay for it, and then finally the state took credit and they started to contribute, and then all of a sudden, within the last 15 years, that's all we get out in Rocky Hill, or that's all we get out of the legislature, and I might add the Democratic legislature, is the closing of the Rocky Hill Veterans Hospital. And no matter how they phrase it, or how slick the terminology or the linguists may be, they can't take away the fact that they do not service 5,000 veterans anymore. They change it into a chronically ill or whatever. That's not living up to the expectations or to the money that was left to them by the veterans of World War I. And this is what's going on. And presently, it's going on in the legislature today. Here, the legislature, they're more interested in legislation involving tolls than they are in their veterans. Case in point, all these bills, the toll bill, the tax bill, the budget, is all put together and all voted on and taken on the floor. The veterans' bills are concerning veterans, and they're still debating them. There should be no debate. An act concerning property tax exemptions for service members and veterans. That shouldn't be a problem. They have one in force now. That's all they have to do is amend it and increase it, and that will solve that. But they're going to debate it, and they're going to milk it, and they're going to tell you how they're concerned about veterans, and they're proposing this. But when the state representatives send out our state tax dollars, which we pay for these notices, they're not going to tell you that they voted for a tax increase, that they're voting for tolls. They're not saying that. They're saying we proposed you a proposal for veterans. Here again, the sham, the big secret, just clouded over. And then the next one, and it's an attribute to them, but here again, an act providing for discounted fishing license for veterans. It's a good thought, but our concern should be with the veterans who come back and who need guidance. And fishing is good therapy, but most of us can figure that out on our own. Another concerning access to veterans resource information, 7240, right? 7247. This is information regarding state programs. They're trying to intertwine the veterans programs with state programs. And eventually what they'll say to us, veterans, oh, you don't need the veterans programs anymore. We got you combined in the state programs. Veterans are different. Veterans never looked for anything. When they enlisted, like myself, at 17, that was the furthest thing from their mind was, what am I going to get out of this thing? Foremost and firstmost was the fact that the country was in need, the country needed help, the country was at war, and they came forward, not looking for anything. And so, with luck of the draw, some came back, and like at Normandy, some are hollow heroes in my mind. They're saints. Because just think, if they didn't take that big step in 1944, where would you and I be today? Think back. I know where I would be. I'd be in an oven. Where you would be luck of the draw. This is what they stamped out. Hatred. And the next act is a joint resolution memorializing Congress to recognize women in cadet nursing. Grandstanding. That's all it is. We recognize women already. We have women that served honorably and well in the armed forces. We have women that are serving on the front lines now in combat units because they want to serve. And being in the service has to come from the heart. Not what are you going to get out of it, like many legislatures. What's in it for me? You look at it, see what's in it for them. Insurance, every year they increase their pay. Pretty good thing for working. How many months out of the year do they work? And then if they call in a new session, which they're planning on doing now, they're paid extra for it. And they're paid extra mileage. And that was a sham too, until it was discovered. They would ride in other people's cars and they were collecting the full mileage. Never used their car. They were stacking up 4 to a car, 5 to a car. One used his car and the other 4 freeloaded. And you and I paid for it. And that's all I'm saying is the veterans are not treating properly. I don't care how many of these proposals they point at you. Ask them, what did you do to our state's veterans hospital? We don't have one anymore. What are we doing? Are you aware that every veteran, whether it be woman or man, that goes into a nursing home is paid, the state receives a stipends. They receive money. And the money, once a year, is put into the general fund. The state takes that fund and uses it for their own purposes, and they don't return any money to the veterans. Or they're not accountable for the money they're returning. It goes into the general fund, and how they take it out, God only, you and I only know. I don't know how they do it, but they take it out for their own state use. And that's not the way it's intended. The intent of it is that money should go 100% to the veterans. And if there's a quarter left to it, it should go into another veterans project, not back to the state. And that's what it goes. And that more or less concludes it, where it's just that I feel, it's my own personal feeling, I feel that these politicians that wrap themselves in the American flag, that have never done a thing to serve it, or have never shed a drop of blood to defend it, they're out there wrapping themselves in a flag every Memorial Day. Or when they send out a flyer standing alongside the National Guard. They never served in the National Guard. standing alongside veterans. They're not veterans. And that's about the size of it. If you're gonna claim you're supporting veterans, show me the bill that you propose. And propose something that's constructive and helpful. And give us back our state veterans hospital, and give us back our facility, and let us serve the 5,000 veterans that we used to serve at Rocky Hill. Do you know how many veterans we have now? We have a facility that's, in my mind, an old people's home that only services 150 people, and we have something like 350,000 veterans in Connecticut, and it's growing. And I'd like to share something with you, if I may. If you're a young man and you go off and you lose your legs in defense of your country, and you come back, and you need hospitalization, or you need a place where they have to have semi-nursing care, are you going to be comfortable if they put you in a home where the average age mean, is 85, 90 years old? Because look back. And I'm 17. I'm young. But look back at the veterans that were 21, 25. They're 90. And they're pushing 95 in many cases. And we show little or no concern for them. I see a bus that the state provides to cart all the politicians in town. I don't see a bus to cart veterans that can't march anymore due to their legs have gone. And these are men that served in the infantry that could do 50, 60 miles a day with 130 pounds on their back, plus ammunition and a rifle. Their legs can't take it anymore. But we're carting around in a bus or a wagon or whatever you want to call it, the politicians in Simsbury. But we're not carrying veterans that would like to participate in the parade but can't walk the mile or so. Think about it. Where are our priorities? I know where they should be, but where are they? Now, in conclusion, I'd like to explain the military hierarchy in the Marine Corps. And it starts from private, and it goes all the way up to general. And anybody that's knowledgeable in the Marine Corps will tell you the Marine Corps is run, the bolts and nuts of it is run by the sergeants in the Marine Corps. That's who runs the Marine Corps. And it goes PFC, which is one stripe, and then it goes to Lance Corporal, which is one stripe and cross rifles, which dates back to the old Army and old Marine Corps, the Civil War and such, when they had these Lance Corporals. It goes back to heritage. And then your next grade is your corporal. and that's two stripes and a cross rifles. And then you go to sergeant, basically what they call the basic sergeant. And that's 3 stripes and cross rifles. Then you go to staff sergeant. That's 3 stripes and a rocking stripe underneath. And he's called a staff sergeant. And his job is to, I'll go into that at a later point. And then we go into what we call the gunnery sergeant. That's 2 rockers and 3 stripes. And then we go into the master sergeant. That's 3 rockers and 3 stripes. Then we go into the first sergeant. He's the super duper sergeant. He's the wherewithal and has all the answers. And that's a diamond, 3 rockers on the bottom, 3 stripes on the top. And then we go to the honor sergeant and the most knowledgeable sergeant, and that's what we call the sergeant major. And then you go from there, you go into your warrant officers, then into your officers, your second lieutenant, your first lieutenant, your captain, your major, your lieutenant colonel, your colonel, and the differential between a lieutenant colonel and a full colonel is the lieutenant colonel is a gold leaf, silver leaf, and the colonel is what we call an eagle. And then you go to the brigadier general, which is 1 star, and lieutenant general as such, and you go up. Now, this breaks down in the field where you have the Marine Corps squad, which composes of 13 men. And 13 men are the personnel in the squad. So then you have what we call 3 fire teams, and then you have the sergeant, which is the squad leader, and he's in charge of the 13 men. He reports to the platoon sergeant, the staff sergeant, and the staff sergeant reports to the sergeant, the first sergeant. And that's the breakup. Well, I'd like to take the time right now to close and allowing me to come into your homes and just leaving you with the thought that let's not forget the fallen. That's where it all is. And we just had Memorial Day, and tomorrow we're going to remember the invasion of Normandy, the invasion of France, 1944, June 6th. And there'll be a lot of men to remember. Let's not forget them, lest we not forget.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.